Morning, ladies. Bree Stensrud here, and I am going to have a conversation this morning with the fabulous Shannan Martin, who will be joining me here in a second. Those of you who've been around Women of Welcome know Shannan probably because she is just a real sweet friend to Women of Welcome, and so I'm excited to talk with her because she went on a border trip with us, oh man, pre-COVID. And yet we still talk about some of the things that we saw during that trip and who we went with and all of those things. So when Shanna comes on, I just saw her log on, so she'll just ask me in a second and we'll get going. So another cold morning in Colorado Springs. I don't know where you are. Tell me like what your temperature is where you are. Hi, everybody. Colorado Springs is weird. We get these really sunny days and then we get just like snow with sun, and then all of a sudden it goes away super fast. So anyways, it's kind of lovely. We get the best of both worlds. So Shannon's trying to request. Shannan, how do I, here we go, I'll go with bring you in. I'm not a big, there we go. Gotta flip it around. I love it.
Oh my goodness, what?
Can you flip it around? Because right now I see your ring light.
Yeah, I should be able to. Oh my goodness, what is happening here?
I don't know, but I love it because
there's never a dull moment. I'm here, everybody. Why do I not see an option to flip my camera?
I don't know.
It's nowhere.
Oh man.
What is happening?
Well, I would love to talk to your face.
I would love that too. Good gravy. It's not giving me, it's nowhere on my screen.
Oh my goodness. Should we try it again? Should we log off and log back on?
Can you just can you kick me out? And I try to, here we go. Oh my gosh.
How can I kick you out? I'm like, how do you kick someone out?
Hi, everybody. It's me. I'm more than just a ring light.
We made it happen. I like it.
Easy.
Good. Oh, how are you? Is it snowing in Indiana?
No, today is a warm up for us, but it's supposed to be rainy. But like yesterday and the day before we're in the 20s, and today we're supposed to get to the 60s, but we'll see what happens. Who knows?
Oh, who knows? It's the Midwest is a whole nother animal.
Yeah.
Well, I was just telling everyone that you're such a great friend of Women of Welcome, and they've probably seen you in our feed all over the place just because you've been a part of our equipping series videos that we've done. You've gone to the border with us, and you've been on several kind of webinar conversations that we've had. And so just always love getting to chat with you. So down to earth. If anyone who's ever read any of your books knows how wonderful and wonderfully ordinary the conversations are, and just so we're gonna have another wonderfully ordinary but fun conversation. And you went with us to the border pre-COVID.
Yep.
So it was like 2 years ago. 3?
A little over. Yeah. I mean, I think it was the fall before COVID. So yeah. 2.5 years ago. It feels like it was just like last year because it was one of the last things I did.
Oh, really?
You know,
Well, so I've been asking folks that have come on just these same 3 questions just to kind of keep the conversation short. But why did you say yes to going to the border? Because I feel like a lot of people want to go to the border, and then sometimes they're like, why would you even go there? I mean, there's just always this, some people are real jazzed about it, and other people are like, that feels like a very dangerous place to go. Why did you say yes to going to the border?
I mean, for me, it was an immediate yes. And for me, you know, I think everybody does have their reasons. For me, part of my reason, other than the fact that I'm interested in the conversation around immigration, and there's plenty that I don't know. But for me, I live in a community and in a neighborhood with a large population of immigrants from beyond the southern border. And it was, so I had that contextual layer, I guess. And I think probably a lot of us do. You know, this is the way America is kind of taking shape in a lot of places. For me, I wanted to have that extra kind of personal layer of understanding of just getting a slightly different perspective on my actual neighbors and you know, some of the things that they have endured, and a little bit more about the journey for some of them. So for me, there was that, you know, I remember being down at the border on that trip, and I'm sure I talked about this while we were there, but I just kept thinking of my neighbors back at home and thinking of, you know, like I said, like just their experiences, their journey. And it helped me have a new layer of understanding for some of them.
Well, and I think a lot of us probably are know people who are immigrants, but we're not necessarily in relationship and friendship with them. So to kind of ask about maybe, and not all immigrants obviously came through the southern border or had a traumatic experience, obviously. But for those who had, I mean, that's not an easy conversation unless you're in a deep relationship with someone. Because one of the things we learn, obviously, when we go down to the border and we talk with people who are really kind of stuck in that, in kind of the brokenness of our system, is we learn about all of kind of the trauma and the heartache and the pain that happens in the journey up and then getting to the border and then being deported, or also just not being able to come in, and it's not what they thought it was. And so we learn that it's very hard to show up and ask someone to talk about maybe the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to them, the most painful journey that's they've ever had to take. And so going down and just trying to get an understanding for yourself so that you have some further context to be a better neighbor is probably something that was really important to you, I imagine. It's
100%. Yeah. And even just, you know, my kids' friends at school. I mean, this is such a community, and in particular, our neighborhood has just been so shaped by this reality. You know, it's a conversation for people like me, but it's a reality for so many of the people around me. And so it helped bring me out of the headspace of, like, you know, because just now I almost said it's such a part of the conversation, and it is, but to so many people, it's so much more than a conversation. It's their actual lives.
Right.
You know, it's their history, it's their future, the future of their families. You know, there's so much tied to it. And we have had really some, over the years, you know, we've lived in this neighborhood now for 10 years. And so there have been neighbors who have been really, without us asking, because I think you're right. I don't think this is something I should never be the one to say, so tell me about
your really hard immigration story.
Yeah, exactly. But as we've built those relationships over time, some of our neighbors have really vulnerably invited us in to that part of their history and that part of their lives. And it's, you know, so for me, it's like when I was at the border experiencing all the things that we experienced together, I was also had this sort of running loop of these conversations that I had with people I really care about. And so it was a way to kind of meaningfully merge things I had known about or heard about, and to actually see some of that with my own eyes. And I will never see it in the ways they experienced it and lived it. Right. But I think there's something really important to the decisions we make around where we choose to kind of position our bodies in the world. You know, it matters where we stand. It matters who we stand with. And any opportunity we have to take something that feels kind of theoretical, even though I think a lot of important work can happen through conversation and through what might not be necessarily personal to us. Right. But when we have the opportunity to pull ourselves kind of out of our brains and put our feet on somebody else's soil in a way that is hopefully, you know, not harmful, in a way that is, you know, to be there as a listener and as a learner and as a person of empathy and as a person of growth, I think there is no better teacher than proximity.
Right.
And you know, putting ourselves in these other contexts that, or, I mean, were it not for that trip, I don't know that I ever would have, you know, I on my own, I would have never done that. You know, there wouldn't have necessarily been a reason. So that's why I appreciate what Women of Welcome is doing, is that you're opening up the opportunity for women who want to learn, for women who want to grow. Because I am somebody who, I grew up formed by a lot of really toxic and harmful narratives about this and any number of other things. And so it's become my job as an adult and as a neighbor to unlearn and relearn a lot of that. And this is part of that for me.
Right. Yeah. And I love what you said about that, because it is about listening and learning. And I love when we go on these trips, because I feel like even just Women of Welcome is in a posture of listening and learning too. We always talk about how we're on a journey together and we don't have it all figured out, but we want to be a community that is trusted to be the translator for you on something that you wouldn't normally or readily engage in yourself, and open opportunities to introduce you to people who have experienced these things so that you can hear from them. You know, I don't have a prime major role when we go to the border. My prime major role is just to really facilitate listening to other people. And I think that's the beauty of showing up and going to some of these, frankly, intimidating, sometimes scary places, things that seem scary, right? Until you get close proximity and you're like, this isn't scary. This is something I need to care about. This is a gospel issue. But you said proximity matters. We talk about that all the time, just about how proximity changes you, and it changes your, I personally feel like proximity changes my faith. It always deepens it. It always reorients it. The recalibration that happens in my own personal life, not because someone's waving a finger at me or telling me where I should need to get to, but because the Holy Spirit that has a channel to actually, you know, and some context to move around within. I feel like that's always so beneficial on these listening and learning trips. But we were talking about proximity. When you were there, what was the thing that has stuck with you? You know, it's been a couple of years. What was your biggest takeaway, or what is the thing, if, you know, when people ask you, so you went to the border, what is the thing? What is that stuck with you?
You know, it was such a meaningful trip altogether. The moment that I think is most deeply in me was just standing at the wall. You know, being there at that physical barrier, and where we were. I mean, I'm sure you've done so many of these trips, Bree. You know, you probably don't just have one.
It's so sobering.
It's not just one place.
Sobering.
Right. And that's what, for me, you know, we had heard so much about the wall and building the wall and blah, blah, blah. To stand there kind of in the middle of the desert, to see this enormous wall, this long length of wall, and there was really not much else around us. There were people on the other side who were engaging with us and talking with us, and that was hard. And it was also meaningful and memorable. But for me, and this might sound kind of silly, but there was, where we were at that particular time, there was a railroad track kind of behind. And for me and my neighborhood, the railroad, my neighborhood is on the other side of the tracks. And so the train is such a grounding presence in my life, whether I like it or not. You know, it makes me late for meetings sometimes. But it's home. Like, for the rest of my days, a train whistle will bring me to this place of home. And so it was just an extra layer of context for me to be there where we were, to have trains going on behind us, and there wasn't much else out there. It was just kind of this barren sort of place. It was powerful. It was astonishing. And I, as someone who has followed this issue closely, it was astonishing just to see the physical presence of this barrier, this wall, to see how long it was and how high it was, and how, you know, to think of people using resources in that way and in that place was just, it was perspective that I didn't have prior to that. And to go beyond that, I mean, the conversations, to talk to somebody on the other side of that wall, like to be there, and there, you know, you're in a conversation with somebody and there's just this barrier between you. That's a powerful moment. And a really humanizing moment, and a kind of a galvanizing moment to realize, you know, this is where we are.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this was the trip where the folks on the other side of the wall, the portion, were mothers.
Yeah.
Was that the trip? Okay. So it was so very interesting to see other women, other mothers on the other side of the wall, and then have them come in dialogue with us.
Yeah.
And telling us what they were doing. Do you remember what they were doing?
I think they were picking up trash, I feel like. Is that right?
They were picking up trash. They were collecting manipulables. Is that right? They were collecting things for their kids' classroom.
Yeah.
Kids who like play
right.
with like plastic bottles and things that would help with sensory
Yeah.
learning and counting. And I remember we all kind of got back in the van and we were like, it's a bunch of room moms right there on
That's
the other
right.
side of the fence, of the wall.
Yep. And again, I mean, I think it's so important to honor our differences. You know, I'm not about like, we're all the same, because we are meaningfully created in some different ways and in very different contexts. And I don't want to diminish that. And yet we have this shared humanity. And that was just that was a shared humanity moment where, you know, it was all women on this trip. And I believe the women on that trip were all moms. And even if, you know, I'm just such a believer that all women, and really all people, we all mother. We all have people in our lives that we mother. And that was really relatable. You know, it's like we are gathering our manipulatives might look different, and it does, but we're all just doing our best for our kids. And that's harder for some of us than it is for others.
Yeah, I think we were a little bit surprised. Like, I mean, it kind of, the perception was, you know, they were on the other side of the wall, and the neighborhood was a pretty rundown neighborhood. And there was kind of just like this yard of trash, and they were walking through the trash. And so immediately when you see that, you're kind of like, you know, there's some things that maybe some perceptions that you have that you think about that. But then when we had several folks on the trip who could speak Spanish, and they just started greeting the ladies, and then they came over to chat, and we ended up praying with them and talking about what they were doing with their day. And they were talking about, well, we're doing this, and then we're going to go pick up the kids. And then you know, it was just like you said, it was just this shared moment of relatability, and just, I think it kind of settled people to recognize, like you said, the humanity in someone else, and the care and concern. I mean, a lot of times we think those on the other side of the wall, they're over there for some reason, and it's not, and it's usually some kind of negative reason, you know, they're over there. And
well, and we're taught to fear. We're taught to fear the people on the other side.
Yeah. And I remember one of the moms said, I remember when this wall wasn't here. And she said they built this wall right in the middle of the neighborhood. And she said, we used to walk over and get groceries and come back home and make dinner. And it used to just be this thing where it's like they weren't coming in to do things like to integrate into the US. They were in their neighborhoods, they were in their homes. And so it was just also interesting to hear their perspective of, okay, so now there's this wall, and it cuts them off from family and community that is on this side. And again, I mean, if you've hung around Women of Welcome long enough, you'll know that it's not that we're against secure borders or vetting or anything of that nature. I think Shannan and I, what we're trying to just talk about is really the closer you get in proximity, the more you realize what effect those things and those policies and those resources and how they're used, how they affect people. And you might not think about that when you're squarely focused on certain talking points or policy points. You're not necessarily getting close to the people that they actually impact.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So immigration has been, I think, there are immigration lawyers. They say that immigration is actually more complicated than tax law, immigration law, and immigration policy. So it can be a very intimidating subject for people to enter into, especially since it's become so politically divisive with people. Obviously, at Women of Welcome, we are strictly nonpartisan. We enter into this from a biblical perspective, first and foremost. One of the things I would love to hear from you is, what would you say to women who are kind of like a wallflower about this issue right now, or they're pretty intimidated to jump in, or either to go on a trip or even just to kind of engage or advocate? What would you say for those who are outside looking in?
I think a trip is a good place to start. And maybe not even to start necessarily, but I don't feel at all like, these trips are for somebody who already has their mind made up or who already understands. I don't understand immigration law. I won't pretend to. But it's an opportunity to kind of position ourselves as neighbors and as listeners. And that's just kind of a, when we get those opportunities to be near people who don't necessarily remind us of ourselves, who don't feel familiar, who, any sort of kind of difference, whatever that might be, I think we need to take any opportunity we can get to be near others, So I think this is anybody who is feeling like, I feel confused. I really appreciated, honestly, it was challenging for me in some ways, but I appreciated when we talked to Border Patrol officers as part of that trip. That was just for me, it was like, I am collecting information and I am listening to a wide range of people who are involved in this reality in a way that I will never be involved. And that's where growth happens. That's where we start to, form our own understanding, maybe apart from the narrative we were given, or even the narrative that we've built over time. I just think, like you said, Bree, being near people, it changes us. It changes it, and it doesn't mean that has to be, it changes everything about us. It doesn't even have to be, it changes our whole mind about this particular issue or that particular issue. What it does is it just gives us more information. It makes us a more well-rounded neighbor, a more well-rounded person and listener. And I guess I want to speak really briefly to this idea of, is it safe? Is it dangerous to go? From my personal perspective, I never felt fear. I didn't feel like it was scary. I felt like it was uncomfortable sometimes, but I think discomfort is very, very different from danger. And that's something that's one of the things that we kind of have to relearn or unlearn. One of my most beautiful memories, and I'm just kind of thinking of this even as we have this conversation, the night we came into El Paso, I ended up walking around downtown El Paso by myself, just because that's the way it worked. And it was one of the most, forever, I will hold that evening as like one of the most beautiful and peaceful and life-giving moments. I cannot explain it, but I guess my point in sharing it is, I was me walking around an unfamiliar city where I had never been, alone in the evening, and it was a beautiful experience. Being among the people of El Paso in the way that I was, it was just, I will remember it forever. So, I think it's important for us to reconsider our thoughts about what's safe and what's dangerous. And difference and discomfort is not the same as danger. So if that's the thing that's kind of holding people back, I would encourage you to just reconsider that. because
Yeah.
it was just a beautiful opportunity to listen to some new people.
And the reality is not everybody can go on a trip.
Yeah.
And I know Women Welcome, we have limited amounts of trips that we can actually take. And so we really do encourage you to look for some of those trusted partners along the border lands areas like Global Immersion, Border Perspectives, Abara Ministries in El
Mhm.
Paso. So, if trips close up for us, there's other people you can do that with that are trusted that we would recommend. But when it comes to like getting close at home to this issue, because for the reality is many of us will not go to the borderlands. We will
Yeah.
not stand at the wall. We will not go over into Juarez or somewhere else and talk to a pastor who's leading a shelter in a church or something like that. So discomfort and fear can still very much exist in our own neighborhoods when it's very unfamiliar to us. So crossing the tracks, as you would,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, where do you think is a very practical place to start engaging this issue coming off the wall?
Mm-hmm.
Coming off the wall, what would be a very practical first step in your own community that maybe either you've taken or that you would recommend?
I'll say two things about that. I mean, I say this knowing that my location in the world is different from many others. So, not everybody has this sort of access to different communities in the way I might. But for me, a really, aside from the fact of like just talking to the people around me, and this is a small thing, but I remember somebody saying to me, and they live in my community, but they live in a different part of town. And I remember them saying, we don't even like how could we begin to even get to know some of the Latino community? And my response to that was go to these grocery stores or these, it's like we have these touch points. And there's part of us, speaking for myself as a white woman, there's part of me that would feel like that's uncomfortable. What if there's a language barrier? What if they think it's weird? And on the other side of that is like, that's an opportunity to just find proximity on our own to support those businesses, number one. And then to kind of gain some familiarity where we might not have some. That's just a basic thing. And that's what I'm saying. Like we do have some agency in where we place our bodies, like where we move, where we walk. I'm not a Spanish speaker. I wish I was. I know minimal just from high school. I can kind of cobble together things
Yeah.
if I need to. But that's something, that I guess you could say is a hurdle for me. And yet there are still ways to move beyond that, to not let that be, something that stands in the way of relationship, or just even, I don't think this means that we necessarily, we're not out to just, it can be dangerous and damaging to have the mentality of like, I'm going to go find a new Latina friend.
Have a tourist. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But to say like, okay, this matters to me, and I one thing I can do is support these small businesses, to put some of my money there, that kind of thing. I think that's a good place to start. And I'm not remembering what my second point was.
Well,
I was going to say two things.
I'll add this too. Maybe it'll come to you. When I first started in this work, I visited a Hispanic community in their church, their congregation, on a Sunday morning, and that was first time I'd been to a lot of African American churches. I had gone to other denominational churches, like in my seminary work and whatnot, but not ethnically diverse. It was still pretty homogenous in that space. But I remember when I started in this work, I was like, I need to kind of get my bearings on maybe where some of these communities really exist. And so I visited a Latina church here in town. And I tell you, I have never, ever, and I'm a pastor's kid. I went to seminary, like I've been in a lot of churches. I have never been greeted so warmly and felt so welcome than I did in that church. And the worship was so like crippling in such a really good way, in just such a beautiful way,
Mhm.
and I just felt it in different places of in my soul and in my heart and in my mind. And there was a language barrier, but halfway
Mhm.
through the service, someone came up and brought me like a little translator
Yeah.
earpiece and like, are you good? Are you, and we're like
Yeah.
cobbling together. And it was just beautiful. And a lot of people who are wondering about like, well, what can I do to support Ukrainians, or what can I do to support, Afghans and whatnot? Like you could Google some of these other congregations in your community and just show up and just sit in the back, or, just bring a smile and sit in the back,
Yeah.
do a little bit of research that so you don't show up completely awkward. If it's an
Right.
Orthodox church or something, you want to cover your head or whatever that may be.
Right.
But it's about just showing up and leaning into learning, and like you said, and listening, and just not showing up as a tourist, but showing up as a sincere learner and wanting to be a more well-rounded neighbor,
Yeah.
like you said.
Yeah.
So it takes the initiative, right? I don't know if that stirred up maybe what you were. Is there
It
another
did.
point?
It did. It was magic. The other thing I was going to say is that for those of us who don't necessarily have the built-in opportunity for proximity, I mean, I'm kind of a nudger, and I would say, just think about that. I always invite people. I grew up in exclusively white spaces. And so for a long time, that was my perspective too. Like, but what am I supposed to do? Like, I can't experience diversity because I live in this all white community.
Right.
Just spend some time thinking about that. Like, why is that? What is my part in that? Because we have agency in some of those decisions, and I know it's complicated, but even just allowing yourself to think about like, wait, why is this a community that's exclusively white? Like, I wonder why that is. I wonder why people of color have not found this to be a place of welcome. And is there anything I can do to help change that? That's a powerful question to ask, and it's an uncomfortable question to ask. However, if we find ourselves in a situation where it's like, we just don't have these opportunities around us, we have the opportunity to change who we are listening to on social media. We have the opportunity to change the books we're reading, the shows we are watching, the music we are listening to. We have the opportunity to be led spiritually by pastors of color. And we need to be taking those opportunities. We need to be diversifying the content that we are consuming and learning from. And that's something every single one of us can do, and we need to be doing it. That's something we can that's a starting point for all of us. When I did that not so long ago, I kind of made that conscious switch. It has changed me. And it does, and it will. That's what it's meant to do. When I realized, as a person who was on this path to growth, but I was still really, I'm a huge reader. I read all the time. And I was really only reading white authors. And that was a blind spot for me. At the point that I recognized it, then it was on me to do something about it. And so I made the personal choice that I will not read 2 books in a row by white authors. So it doesn't mean I am a white author, by the way.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying we shouldn't be reading white authors, but we shouldn't be only reading from people who remind us of ourselves in some way. So, to just make that, and to keep myself accountable, I taped a piece of paper to my wall in my bedroom, and I wrote down every title that I was reading as I went, as just, like I said, like a personal accountability, like I am holding myself to this. And so making those seemingly small shifts really can have a lot of impact.
I love it. And I mean, I think that a conversation for another day is, and that we have, and really in our equipping series, Catherine Freeman talked about this in our equipping series videos that we have. And if you're wondering where those are, you can find them on our profile page here or over at womenofwelcome.com, is how race does play into immigration, and how I never actually really thought that it did. It was always, is it legal or illegal? It's kind of the bottom line for me. But then as you start to really understand the history of immigration in this country, you start to see what's really baked in to the system, and how we got where we are today. And so while you may not feel like we are acting on certain prejudices now today. Like, how could we? It's 2022, right? And yet it's a big learning curve to realize that a lot of our immigration policies and allowances globally are definitely based geographically in certain areas. And you start to wonder. I mean, we saw this even in Ukraine, those who were fleeing, and we saw those who looked European, who looked white, were getting let in right away. And then we saw those who were in Ukraine going to school. Students are going to school, or those who had fled Afghanistan and they were refugees in Ukraine, and they looked very different. They had darker skin, and how they were being, held and further vetted and asked questions. And that you just start to think, oh, so it is a bit more complicated than I thought. There is something baked into here that really needs to be uprooted. And so again, that's, a conversation for another day that would be great to have. But we do have a really wonderful video by Catherine Freeman about that.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
Yeah. So in any case, man, we've covered way more ground than just the border trip, didn't we?
Of course we did.
But, Women of Welcome, folks, we love Shannan Martin. If you're not following her, she's a really great follower, and she's a friend of ours. And I'm so thankful for your time this morning, Shannan. Every moment with you is just so wonderful, and I'm always learning something from you. So thank you for
I'm here. Thank you for having me on. I'm cheering on this work. It matters so much. So thanks for inviting me to be on. I'm sorry about the little hiccup in the beginning. Who knows? Who knows what happens with tech? We will never know.
I don't, and I certainly don't really understand Instagram. I'm just like, which button? Great. Okay.
I'm just tapping the screen, hoping something works here.
Thanks, friend. I love you. We'll talk
yes,
to you.
love you too. See ya.
Bye.